So, here's what we're going to do. I want to talk about, we have gears that we need to talk about. Okay, but the interesting about gears is they start talking about torque. Problem is, we don't know what torque is. I remember during lecture, yeah, you're going to see the same lecture again. You know, I think I got something that you need to go get upstairs. So, the idea is this. With torque, it's funny because we were going through with the other class, when I was doing the training and doing all this stuff, we were going through all this stuff, and you know, they said, all right, calculate the torque. And it was like an hour in, we're finally somebody said, what's torque? And we needed to explain what torque was for that person. So I'd rather just explain real quick what torque is with my notes. And then we will talk about the gears and all that, because they talk about torque and that. So I wanted to use like 2 slides or 3 slides about torque, just to talk about it here. Then we'll go on and talk about the other stuff. So torque. Torque is going to be force. Now really, with this class, we probably should make sure that it's force perpendicular. So what I would like you to do in your notes is actually write a perpendicular sign. So it's going to be force perpendicular times radius. We're not going to go into the SOHCAHTOA stuff right now, but the idea would be, let's say I want to open that door. There are 2 things important to open that door. One would be the amount of force I give, but it has to be perpendicular, okay? If I give a lot of force, the camera won't follow me, that's okay. If I give a lot of force and try to open it like this, doesn't matter how hard I pull, I'm not actually going to open the door. The force has to be perpendicular to the door in order for me to get any torque. Does that make sense? So I can't apply torque in the wrong direction. It has to be perpendicular to the door. The other part, I'm going to finish my thought, is radius, how far away I am from the door. I can't open a door, okay, from over here. I can't open the door from the hinges. There's no radius to it. My distance away is 0, so I'd have absolutely no torque. The further I go out from the hinges, the more torque I have. Okay? So torque has 2 things. The amount of force, which we should have perpendicular, so you do a little perpendicular sign right there. Okay? And how far you are away from the axis of rotation. Whether it's hinges and a door, okay, a wrench. We already talked about when we turn a wrench, it's not like you want to turn a wrench right on the bolt right here. You want to have your hand as far away from that bolt as possible so you have the most amount of torque. Okay? Okay. So, more examples of torque. Units. This is physics notes. So you could have Newton meters. You could also have foot pounds. All right. Anyone that's taken auto tech, they're always going to measure in foot pounds, and that's important. I'm going to actually show a bolt later, but if you are going to change your own tires, you need to be extremely careful that you're not over torquing. Okay. That's why they have things called torque wrenches. All right, so if we walk over to Autotech, you're going to see a chart for every car, and it's going to say how many foot-pounds, what's the maximum torque to put on it. If you over-torque, okay, and you use a torque wrench, or if you don't use a torque wrench and you keep over-torquing that bolt, it's going to get stretched and pop off. I'm going to show you that video here later. Okay. Now, chivalry versus practicality. I remember my high school physics teacher teaching me this, and it's helpful for everybody. Let's say you're going to go on a trip and you don't have those roller suitcases. You're carrying 2 suitcases of different weight. All right, let's see if I have something that's different weight. Here's the 2 suitcases. They have different weight. All right. Instead of just carrying your own suitcase, offer to carry your mom's suitcase. So here, Mom, let me carry that for you. All right? It looks like you're just being a really nice person. However, it's actually going to make your job easier. When I'm lifting up this suitcase, my back has to keep myself upright. Okay, so right now the torque is actually right here, pretty much on my belly button. And I have torque that I have to apply to keep myself upright. Okay, there's torque of this pulling me down, and I got to push myself up. So if I'm walking around a long airport, after a while my back's going to start to hurt because I'm off center. So what do? I say, here, Mom, let me carry your suitcase for you. I'm a nice guy. But what that's actually doing is it's going to cancel out the torque. Now, what if this suitcase is lighter than this suitcase? Well, you actually do this automatically, okay? If you have one side that's heavier than the other, you automatically put the other hand further out. All right, torque is force times radius. If this force is less than this force, I will increase my radius so that I'll be evened out. And you do it automatically. If you're carrying two things and one's heavier, you just push the other hand a little further out. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, you also, so I already talked about torque wrenches. I will show a video of getting over torque. There was I remember, because a few years ago I would take the auto tech class during my free period, just for fun. And there was a student that starts telling the story to Mr. P about, oh man, my dirt bike. I keep tightening the bolt that goes into the oil pan, and then next thing I know, oil's still leaking out. So I tighten it a little bit more, and then it starts leaking out again. Well, fortunately, he told the story because Mr. P said, well, listen, if you torque it one more time, it's probably going to pop off, because he was over torquing the bolt. And what was happening was that bolt was getting stretched apart. And the reason it was leaking was that bolt got stretched so the threads weren't matching, so then oil could keep coming out of it. And so he kept tightening it and tightening it. Sooner or later, the head would have popped off the bolt, and the rest of the bolt would have been stuck in that oil pan, and he would have had to buy a whole new oil pan. Okay? So if you're going to go change your own oil, change your own oil. That's all right. You won't probably over torque it, but don't keep squeezing, driving it in until there's no way you can open it back up again, because you're doing much more damage than you think. All right? What about if you had to change a tire? Okay, let's say you're out, don't have any cell service, and you got a flat tire. All right? If your wrench that you have in the back of your trunk cannot open it, all right, it's torqued really well, then what you want to do is get a cheater bar. Slide something else over it. Okay, so if you have a wrench that's only this long, what they talk about is getting a cheater bar, something like a pipe that you could slide over the wrench and increase the radius from this to that. All right, and when you increase that radius, now you'll have more torque and you'll be able to loosen those lug nuts. All right, in Mr. P's class, what he'll have, you won't just use a regular wrench. Okay, if you didn't have the air gun, you would have a breaker bar. You'd have a really, really long radius. So you have a big amount of radius, you have enough torque to break that lug nut open. Okay? All right. Engine stuff too. And when you talk about engine torque, it's really talking about, here's my engine. All right, here's a piston going up and down. All right, and it's going to the crankshaft, going to the drive shaft, going all the way through. All right, now, if the piston's going up and down from here, all right, you have a certain amount of force and a radius, a distance away. So you got a race car, you don't need a lot of torque. Okay, it's going to be smaller. But the greater the torque, the more you can turn the wheels and pull that heavy load. Now, a big truck might have a piston further out. It might be the same piston and the same amount of force going up and down, but they move the piston further away so you have more torque to turn those big old tires on that truck. Okay? All right, one more thing about torque. Let me just show this real quick. Schweik, come on down. I'm going to use you for the demonstration.
Yay.
This chair is not going to work though. All right, so
One trick from
When we were,
It's
are you gonna not seeing any of it?
Nope.
All right.
You want me to just move the table, or?
You could just go to
Nah, we'll do all right here. Okay. With a wrestling team, the first move that everyone learns in wrestling is a half Nelson. Okay? And so when we put in a half Nelson, everybody knows and they say, all right,
Yes.
are you sick? Are you sick? A little? Oh, sick. All right. Let me grab some. Come here, Trey.
Alright.
That's you get. All right. I'm switching you out, Ryan. Here we go.
That'll be entertaining.
So,
Blinded by the light.
first move in wrestling is for everybody is the half Nelson. All right, and with a half Nelson, bad wrestling coaches always show. All right, you're gonna stick your hand in his armpit, you're gonna grab his neck, and you're gonna run him over. Okay. Well, that's torque. Okay. There's actually two places where I'm gonna apply torque right now. One is right here. Okay. Here's my radius moving up and down. All right. Here's my axis of rotation. Now, here's my other radius. Move your head up and down. Here's the axis of rotation right now. There's the other one. All right? So, if I'm going to apply torque, I have two places to apply torque. The bad wrestling coach says, stick your hand in the armpit. Well, the problem is, the radius is tiny. There's no radius here. Right? I'm so close to the axis of rotation, I have no torque right there. Put your hand on his neck. Well, all he has to do is pick up his head. All right? And drop his elbow, and I have no torque. So the first thing we always teach in wrestling is a half Nelson. The second thing we teach in wrestling is how to defend the half Nelson. Pick up your head, drop your elbow, and you're out. So, with my team, after years of us having bad half Nelsons, I really had to emphasize two things to improve our torque. One is instead of putting your hand in the armpit, I want you to actually put your hand away. Woo! Elbow to elbow. Okay? Now, the second part is instead of grabbing the neck, grab the head, top of the head. All right, now drop your elbow down. Can't drop his elbow down now, right? My torque is probably 4 times greater already. Think about here now, okay? Here, I have a torque of pretty much 0. My radius is 0, I have no torque. Here, my torque is a whole lot bigger. All right, so now there's no way to defend it when I crank Trey over and put him on his back. Thank you, Trey. You did a great job. All right. So,
I would have broken if you did that.
here we go. Let me show you real quick. This is the over torquing of a bolt. This will be really fast, I think, if I can get it working right.
Should we just stop recording, or?
No, keep going with it. I don't care.
That was
All right.
entertaining.
So, if you start over torquing a bolt, look what's happened if it's on an angle. Okay, so they show it on an angle just to give the extra part. So you'll see the stress is more on this side of the bolt already. So far, so good.
Well, why is
Okay.
it fancy?
Angle.
We got a ramp.
Okay.
You're welcome. All right, so because we have that angle, there's going to be more torque on this side. It's getting stretched already. There's no stress here yet. Okay?
Why is it?
Or strain. All right, so, whoa, here we go. Still going, let's finish it off. So it's starting to get pretty ugly right here, right? And look what's going to happen right there. It's stretching. It's already starting to stretch. All right, once it's stretched, it's not coming back. We have to talk about that down the road. We're going to talk about that stress and strain. Boom! And it's gone. Pops off. Okay, so that's what happens when you're over torquing that bolt.
And now you have the
Last application of torque for right now is this. No, we're about to do gear ratios. But why do we have 2 different types of screws? The Phillips head is good for quickness, right? Because you have this, you basically have 4 different ways that the screw can look and fits in. So if you're doing a deck and doing a bunch of deck floors, you're going to do just really quickly, you want Phillips head. But I want you to think about this, because it's funny, because every now and then I was wondering, why is it that we still have Phillips, or we still have slotted? You know, why would we have those? These are so much easier. I see all these Phillips head screws, but why do we still have slotted? Because of the torque. All right? The torque of this, think about the radius here. That's a radius from the center to about there, right? The radius is almost twice as much with a slotted screw. You're never going to see, and you should never ever, don't ever use a power tool with a slotted screw. Don't use a, power drill and put. And sometimes they have the attachment so you can do that. Don't do that. All right. These are used for getting a lot of torque. If you're going to have something that you're going to screw on once and it needs to stay there and never move, and there's not a lot of other screws there, it's going to be slotted. Okay? If you're doing a bunch of screws and it's going to be fast, it'll be Phillips head. But it all has to do with torque. The distance from the radius, this has more torque to it, so it'll stay better. Okay? Okay. All right. We'll pause there.
Okay.
So that is your torque. No, I didn't say he was here. Hi, Abraham. Good. Do we need a second to stand up?
Yes.
Stand up. Throw your hands in the air, wave them like you just don't care. There are three things that gears, pulleys, and sprockets do. One, they can change speed. Two, change direction. Okay, of the rotation. So if one gear's spinning this way and it's locked with another one, it's always going to be opposite. So if one's clockwise, the one it's connected to is going to have to be counterclockwise. So it can be used to change direction, and it can change the amount of torque. Okay, so gears certainly help with torque. That's why when you're in first gear, you want, when you're about to move your car, start going from 0, you're going to want to put it in first. That'll give you the most amount of torque to get the wheels turning. All right. Once you're up to 5th gear, that's more about the speed, the RPMs. Okay. Okay. So there are examples of them. Sprocket. So what is gear? Gear's always wheel to wheel, teeth together. Okay. Belts. A pulley system, all right, or wheel and pulley system is belts with no teeth. Well, I mean, some belts have a little bit of teeth, but we're going to still call that a belt. All right. A sprocket is going to be a gear and a chain. Okay? Elvis, Sophia, why don't you get off the computer and pay attention? Are you looking at the notes online on my project Lead the Way?
Yes, no, no.
No. He's not. Get off the computer. All right. So, all we're going to talk about are gear trains today. Gear train are 2 gears put together at least.
2 or more.
2 or more. All right. Driver is going to be the one that starts it. You have the driver gear and the driven gear. Right? The driver is going to be the one that's actually doing the effort. The driven would be the whatchamacallit? Resistance. All right. You can have an idler gear. All right, because remember, if we have this one, if we have one going clockwise, the other one's going to have to turn counterclockwise. If we need to have both of these going clockwise, let's say we want more torque, we have this one bigger, but we still need the same direction, we're going to have an idler gear in the middle just to make sure that they stay in the right direction. Okay?
So let's say you have a motor and you have a super small gear and a super big one. That'll make it spin a lot faster than just putting a big one.
The motor, now, okay, real quick though, so when we talk about the gears, we're going to talk about the size, the diametric pitch is talking about make sure the teeth size are right, okay? But if you have a little motor right here that's spinning, all right, and every time it does one rotation, the big gear is not going to do a full rotation, right? the big gear that you're connected to is gonna go much slower. But you're gonna be increasing your gear ratio.
So you need to have a big one and then a small one to get it faster.
To get it faster, yeah. You're gonna be going slower. If the driver is smaller, then it's going to be, this one's gonna be slower.
Let's say you have an 84 tooth gear and a 6 tooth gear. So every time.
A 6 tooth, 84 to 6. Yeah, we're gonna talk about that right now when we do the formulas. Okay. So the larger gear is always going to be slower. So see how this is spinning, okay? The red one's spinning a lot faster than the blue one's going to be spinning. These two are connected, so they have the same RPMs, okay? We're going to talk about RPMs in the letter and all that stuff. But just notice that the smaller gear is always going to have a faster speed, okay? Or higher RPMs. They're going to spin faster than the larger gears. Okay? Yes, sir.
The ones that aren't connected to so if they're connected, they have the same RPM, right?
Right. See how these two are connected?
Yeah.
They have the same RPM.
Okay.
Okay.
And the one that's not connected will have a larger RPM?
The smaller one, and we're talking about this compared to this because these are the two that are mated together.
Yeah.
Right? The smaller gear will have a higher RPM than the bigger gear. Okay? All right. The things you need to know. N, these are the things you definitely need to make sure you have written down. N is number of teeth. D is the diameter of your gear. That curly W in the books, hopefully we're getting a curly W in the books tonight. I'm talking about Washington Nationals, people.
What?
Okay, so the curly W, nah.
No. Actually, yeah, go Nationals.
See that door right there, Bryce?
Yeah, leave. I don't
All
want
right.
all my doors.
The curly W in the books, that's omega. That's a Greek W. Okay? Yeah, we're getting fancy here.
That's not what Omega was.
All you frat boys and sorority sisters are gonna have to need to know all your Greek lettering down the road.
Omega is for O.
Yeah, you're right.
It was a different symbol. That's not
That's
Omega.
not Omega.
I'm sorry.
Hmm? That is omega.
No, that W is.
I don't think that's Omega.
Google
That's omega.
Let's-
You're looking at capital omega.
Okay.
We're gonna save it. We're gonna wait so Abraham can look up lowercase omega.
Too late. So Ryan.
Wait for it. Wait for it. I'm not gonna wait for it. There you go. That's omega. Learn it. Omega is the angular velocity, okay, which we're gonna deal with just RPMs, okay. If you go physics, it's gonna be different. It's gonna. Oh, am I what?
Yeah, you're right.
Wait. Say again.
You're right. Yeah.
One more time. I couldn't hear you.
You're right.
All right, thank you. Okay, we're gonna do RPMs for omega, and then torque is tau. Are you gonna argue with me about tau now too? All right. To write tau, this is how you write tau. Tau is actually just a lowercase t. It's again Greek. All right, but it's gonna be. Here's my lowercase t, right? To get tau, all you're gonna do is take the line off the top and make this curly. Do we need to see that again?
No. Well.
I think so. Tau. You have a lowercase t. The only difference between a lowercase t and tau is instead of this top piece, we get rid of it. Instead of a flat line going across, make it a curly line. Here's a tau. And tau is torque. We already talked about it. Questions? All right, here we go. Getting the ratios. Here's our equations. Gear ratio.
Wow. That's super complicated.
Gear ratio over 1 is equal to the number of teeth output divided by the number of teeth input. The diameter output divided by the diameter input. the omega input divided by the omega output. This is flipped again because the bigger the wheel, the slower it's going to be. So they have to be flipped for this one. All right, so this is the only one that's different. The input over the output for omega. 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 Lowercase omega. All right? And tau output divided by tau input. I don't know, check it.
It
Should
is.
be.
I didn't even touch it, Maxwell.
All right, so what's my gear ratio of this going to be? What's my gear ratio?
It's on there.
2.
Let's do N out divided by N input. What's my gear ratio going to be? Do I have my, oh, I don't have my teeth yet, do I? My diameter output is going to be what over what?
4/2.
Yep. My omega input, I have 20 RPMs and 40 RPMs. What's that going to be?
1.5.
It's got to be the same, 40 over 20.
Oh.
These all have to give you the same number.
Uh-huh.
The gear ratio is equal to the number of teeth over output over input. These all give you the same number. So it doesn't matter which one.
So it doesn't really matter like which
They're
one.
all going to be the same value. They all should add, or they should all equal 2. All right. The torque is going to have to be that also.
Wait, so the amount of teeth.
Yeah, you can count the teeth.
12 teeth over 6 teeth.
Okay.
So it's the out always over the end.
Not except yes, except for the omega. The omega is the inverse because the bigger the wheel, the more amount of torque, the more teeth, the bigger the diameter, but the slower it's going to be. So it gets flipped.
So if you have like 84 tooth gear and you're going into a 6, that'll be 84 times 6.
Is 84 your input?
84 teeth.
You're talking about teeth. The
Yeah.
input's on bottom, the output's on top.
No,
If we're
84 is the out.
You said 84 in, so I'm guessing that was input. Just be careful what you label output and input.
So output is what's connected to the motor, input is
Is output the driver or the driven?
Driven.
Driven. Input is the driver.
inputting.
Okay? All right. Is there anything else I got to show right now? Yes, I do. All right. The gear ratios. Gear ratios and mechanical advantage are very similar, but they are different. Mechanical advantage had to do with forces. Gear ratios have to do with torques. Okay? So, we're going to pause for station identification. Go ahead and first off, input, output, 12 divided by 20, right? B to C, input, output, 5 divided by 12. Okay? C to D, input divided by, output divided by input. Did I say that wrong before? Output divided by input, 4/1. Okay, now what about the total gear ratio? I did not talk about this enough before for mechanical advantages. However, I do need to talk about it again to remind you. When we have many simple machines, you would multiply all those mechanical advantages together. So if I had a multi-systems thing, I talked about it a little bit, I know. If you had a lever with a mechanical advantage connected to something else with mechanical advantage, they all multiply. Okay? Gear ratio is the same thing. You would multiply all the gear ratios together, okay, the gear ratio of this, the gear ratio of this, gear ratio of that, you would multiply all together. All right, so you'd have, right, our gear ratios were 0.6, 0.42, and 4. Well, if you multiply those, you're going to get 1. Because you can skip, when you do gear ratios, you can skip the middle parts, the idlers, essentially. The gear ratio from A to D, the total gear ratio, is going to be 20 divided by 20.
Is that if you're spinning
The only thing the problem with this is it changed the direction. Okay, now why would you do all this? Well, we're going to talk about like with serpentine belts in cars later, but you could have these different things connected to other things. So it's not just like I do all these gears just to get the same ratio. But if this is clockwise, let's say A is spinning clockwise, which direction is D going to be spinning?
Counterclockwise.
Well, thanks for jumping ahead, but I want everyone else to think about it. If A is spinning clockwise,
B spinning counter.
B is spinning counter,
Yeah.
C is spinning clockwise, so D is spinning counter.
Yeah.
All right? So how would I get that one to spin in the right direction? So again, it's just 1 to 1. So either way, it didn't matter. We could ignore these. If I need to go from here to there, the normal gear ratio, you can just take the first as the input, the last as the output, and you can skip all the ones inside. Okay? All right, if the last gear had 40 teeth, what would the total gear ratio be? If this was 20 and this is 40, what would be my total gear ratio?
2. Well, no.
Let me say it so everybody can answer.
Okay.
If this is now 40 and this is 20,
Yeah.
don't yell out the answer. I want you to think about it for 30 seconds. What's my gear ratio going to be for the whole system if this is now 40 and that's 20? What's the answer?
2 over 1.
2. 40 divided by 20 would be 2 divided by 1.
Yeah.
The gear ratio would be 2 over 1. All right. I didn't talk about this as much before, but the gear ratios are the mechanical advantage. You multiply them all out. Same thing with gear ratios. You can multiply all the gear ratios to get the total gear ratio. All right? The torque, we could use the torque to figure out the torque here. We could do our gear ratio times our input, that would get, so we could get our output. All right. Do I need to say anything else? Nope. I'm not going to worry about the compound machine. We're going to end it there. All right, peoples.
Yeah.
Peoples. This is what I want you to do. I'm going to give you this worksheet.
Uh-oh.
This is your practice on gear ratio. Next class,